Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shills, desolate, search peasants, fastest, MESAC, minions. I'm useful. Welcome. And today we go back to Iraq. This time to talk about what the Kurds have been up to. And I decided to do a follow-up on the previous video because the developments since the Kurds have been spreading out in Iraq is pretty dramatic. And let's be clear. Apparently, the Kurds are planning to keep Kirkuk and the lands that they're grabbing around the Kirkuk area. And as it turns out, thanks to a fellow YouTuber, American contractor, I'll attach his video below. We can now see a map that shows just which territories the Kurds are grabbing. As it turns out, they're fanning out in all directions and grabbing key points. And I'm not surprised that they would do this, because it turns out they knew about this offensive coming from ISIS a year ago, and they even warned the Baghdad government. And so they've been able to prepare for this for the better part of a year. So here we have the dream of generations of Kurds, Kirkuk, their ancestral capital. Now, after, as one Kurd puts it, they got from ISIS in 2 weeks what they couldn't get from Maliki in 8 years. And so the Kurds have seized Kirkuk as well as all the surrounding swaths of land, expanding their territory they control by 40% without firing a shot. So just grabbing that one province that they've historically claimed, they now have increased their land mass by 40%, and it's also the richest oil regions of northern Iraq. So they are going for the prize. And as it turns out, when they rolled into Kirkuk, they looted the abandoned Iraqi military bases and took guns, air conditioners, and mattresses. And apparently up to 500 armored vehicles were left behind. 200 were burned, but 500 armored vehicles left behind. So I'm not sure how many of those ended up in ISIS hands and how many ended up in Kurdish hands, but it sounds like there was plenty for everyone. And officials in Kurdistan, like I say, they anticipated this assault this week by ISIS as long as a year ago, and they warned Baghdad to no avail. So in the meantime, they built up their own defenses along a 600-mile stretch. And the priority now, of course, is to insulate the region from the violence in Iraq, which is going to be a tough job because they're butting up against ISIS all along the fronts and the territories that they are claiming. And in fact, today they just seized a border crossing with Syria in Rabia, and that is ISIS-controlled territory. So we're going to see some conflict. And it's interesting too. A former U.S. official said, "quote, the Kurds don't particularly care about Mosul. They will expand further below into the oil-rich territory." And it's kind of funny that Mosul is only an hour's drive from the capital of Kurdistan, Erbil. So it's clear that the Kurds do, in fact, don't really care what's going on with Mosul. And it has more to do with the Shia community and the Sunni community and the Turkestan community. And so they have bigger fish to fry, as they say. And Kurdish officials are quickly reviewing their options, but have made it clear there is no going back. An aide to President Barzani said, quote, "We have entered a new era in Iraq that is completely different than before Mosul. We will see how we are going to deal with this new Iraq," unquote. So historically, just like in every country that the Kurds have been in, whenever there's turmoil and chaos, and examine the history of Turkey, and we can see great examples of this. Whenever there's turmoil, the Kurds take another opportunity to grab the prize of the independence they have so long seek. So, and the area around Kirkuk that they claim, part of the contesting of that region is the fact that Saddam Hussein ethnic cleanse that region as well. It used to be dominated by Kurds, but Kurds were moved out of the area or exterminated, and Arabs were brought in, and it became very much a Sunni region. And so let's get back to the story. Another Kurdish official said, quote, "All these areas are going to be incorporated into the region. Currently, our border is with ISIS. It is not with the Iraqi government," unquote. Very dramatic statement indeed, and it shows that everybody is on the same page. All those areas are going to be incorporated into the region. Looking at the map provided by my friend, it is clear that the Kurds are fanning out and have big plans for how much territory they want to control when the dust settles here. And U.S. officials have recognized that Kurdish leaders have been waiting for the Baghdad government to fall apart. And the Kurds know the most realistic path to independence is the collapse of Iraq. And I say that both those statements are certainly true. U.S. officials have been aware of the Kurdish stance, and it's pretty obvious to anyone. And then we also know that the Kurds would certainly have wanted to avoid any kind of war and confrontation with the Baghdad government in Iraq to get what they want. So the best scenario, of course, was for the country to collapse and fall apart, and then for Kurdistan to rise out of that. And they pretty much thought Maliki was the guy to do it. And so now we have the potential clashes with ISIS. So that's the next thing I'm going to be keeping my eye on. There are going to be some inevitable clashes, and I'm just really curious as to how ISIS is going to fare against the Peshmerga. A lot more even match, I assure you. And so then we have one last Kurdish spokesman said, quote, "Everyone is worried, but this is a big chance for us. ISIS gave us in 2 weeks what Maliki has not given us in 8 years," unquote. So they are moving ahead, and to drive the idea home that the Kurds are there to stay, it's pretty important that the Kurds, as I mentioned earlier, sees this border crossing between Syria and Iraq in the northernmost corner. And it's a major border crossing called Rabia, and Iraqi forces abandon it. And on the other side, we have al-Nusra Front, the other terrorist group, or one of the other terrorist groups, and they're just on the other side of the border in Syria. And of course, we know that the Kurds in Syria have clashed with ISIS, they've clashed with the Syrian government, they've clashed with al-Nusra Front, and so now we have the Kurds consolidating that border, because this would connect Iraqi Kurdistan to Syria Kurdistan. And so this is an important ingredient. So that's another thing to keep our eye on, is watch some of the Kurdish logistics, where they end up going, because it's going to be very important to figure out what their intentions are. Because if we have a collapsing Iraq, and we have a collapsing Syria, it could be the opportunity for these two areas of Kurdistan to become one. And it sounds pretty far-fetched in some ways, but when one considers where we are now, it seemed pretty far-fetched a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago, a couple of years ago, a couple of decades ago. And as I mentioned in my other videos about Kurdistan, I tend to think the forces of history are in their favor. And I think geopolitically behind the scenes, there's a lot of players that would actually like to see a greater Kurdistan, an independent Kurdistan. And it would be quite a boon to have right in the middle of this hornet's nest, to have this Kurdish state, which has managed to thrive in the middle of all this chaos. So anyway, there we have it. The Kurds are in Kirkuk. Kurds have doubled the land mass that they control. They seem to be fanning out to take control of all the areas that they consider traditional homelands. They seem to be wanting to unite and create a border crossing into Syria, and pretty dramatic. And I'm with the Kurds on this one. I think this is geopolitically it's fascinating, but as a citizen of the globe, it's stirring to see. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.